Welcome back to another episode of Inside Multifamily Access Control, sponsored by Salta. With me, as always, is Colin. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Happy to be here again.
Yes, sir. So I thought what we'd do today is last week, SIA introduced, the Security Industry Association introduced their megatrends. Every year they do this. It's a list of 20 that come out that are considered the megatrends that are impacting the business today. You'll see that the list is not, I wouldn't call it earth shattering because the terms that they use in are pretty, I think, prevalent, if you would, into the business if you're paying attention. But what we wanted to do was to take the top 5 that they had today and have a discussion about sort of the micro trends or the impacts that these have, because I think that's, and Colin, we believe that actually has more actionable details around it than maybe the broad brush, which I know their intent when they do this is to raise visibility of sort of what people are talking about, and they break it down. So by no means a critical sort of statement. It's just the fact that it's hard to kind of do anything with them unless you discuss them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's almost like you've talked about before of iteration versus innovation. And it seems like these are at a stage of the mega trends are iterations of last year's mega trends, and how do we actually do something with them is the critical piece to touch on.
Yeah, because I think that's the trend is actually more of what it's doing currently now. So if we look at the top 5, they are artificial intelligence at number 1, cybersecurity number 2, predictive data analytics number 3, connectivity and IoT of everything number 4, and cloud computing. So yes, anybody with a pulse in our industry, those are the 5 things that are impacting their business currently as we have now. So, but let's talk about the micro trends of today and then look at it from a tomorrow standpoint of what it means specifically to multifamily access control and smart lock. So let's start with artificial intelligence. I think if you would agree, actually in the past week or so, I've seen some reports and people coming out with products. And I actually think it's the technology that we see at the door of being able to really take data and do something with it. Everything from facial recognition to different levels of assurance. There's an aspect of it of some of the automation that comes from that. But in my opinion, and I'd love to hear your comments, in the multifamily space, this is more smarts getting to the edge on the products, coupled with smarts up in the cloud. So when stuff goes up there, you can data crunch and do something with it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm 100% on board. And the word that immediately came to my mind is automation in this space, right? I think artificial intelligence, yes, it's a trend. Yes, it's out there. Yes, we're doing some really cool stuff, not necessarily in multifamily or even in security, but computing in general has allowed us to put a lot of smarts in new places. But the way we can really impact that, I think, in multifamily buildings and in resident units and things like that, is really focusing on that automation piece of how do we take data and intelligently make the next decision with that data. And so to me, focusing on how do we get that further to the edge, as you mentioned, into different doors, into different spaces, and then trigger those automation events to take place when we know this person or we know this event already happened, triggering that automation. So I think the kind of immediate trend within that larger artificial intelligence is definitely focused on that automation space.
Yeah, and I heard it last week. I sat through a presentation where you had the COO of ADT talking about their recent investment from Google, and they continue to use the term ambient computing, which is a nice fancy marketing word for the sort of flow of people walking into space and it happening and things doing, whether it's I'm hoping that for a $400 million investment, it's going to be far more than just turning lights on when I lock my door, but which I'm sure we'll get to. But at least the initial side of it is the actual data happening at the edge, data happening in the cloud, things happening from it beyond if this then that we've seen in the past, but more of a fluid, more specific to. I was reading Stacy on IoT recently, had a great article around this idea about them really understanding the voice locally, but then also doing it in a manner that beyond with no cameras in that, but understanding like where in the room you are from when you're asking for things or wanting things. So the same idea, I think, as you walk up to the door, the ability for those things at the door to be able to respond to the data that it's seeing is that example. So yeah, I think if we're talking about the trend though that's happening in our AI is the fact that we're starting to see enough inertia going in that direction that if you're not investing in it and do not have this on your roadmap as a company, you're behind. Number one. Number two, if you're a developer or owner, I would start asking these questions around. So what is the company's philosophy, if you would, around how they're going to utilize AI? Because I really do think that's a differentiator, because if you tell me, but how roadmaps work on products and where investments happen, especially right now, people are making plans for next year and then also the years to come from here right now, actually. So understanding roadmaps and things like that, I think, are to become even more important. So that's the effect I think the micro trend AI is having. It's impacting investments and roadmaps, and people should start asking questions around that.
Absolutely agreed with that, for sure.
Thank you. No, when it's right, there's no reason to add more. I love it. That's awesome. All right. So the next earth-shattering one was cyber. Why don't you kick this one off?
For me, the immediate micro trend as it relates specifically to multifamily, and we touched on it last week. Actually, you had mentioned the bill going through the New York City space around, transparency and things of that nature. And so to me, the micro trend as it relates to cyber is risk and risk mitigation. And whose risk is it? Do you need the resident to sign something beforehand? Do you take on the risk? And now there's a new level of insurance that needs to be carried. And so to me, cyber is here, right? I mean, there's risks all over the place. Every time we add another gadget or another device, whether it's onto the IoT or whatever that is, the threat and the reality of a potential risk rises every time. And so for me, I think the risk mitigation and the policies and the awareness and the visibility that an owner needs to provide to their residents is really the micro trend right now. It's not adding additional protections, right? I hope, and I'm pretty confident that the majority of companies out there are doing everything in their power to mitigate that risk, right? The manufacturers are encrypting at their best level. The integrators are making sure that they follow best practices. The residents are trained on, not allowing the phishing scams and all of that sort of stuff to take place. Now it's about how do we mitigate that risk? How do we properly assign the risk to those parties? And how do we make it visible of, here is our stance. Here's what we're doing. We're partnering with these organizations that are doing this. We're having this type of penetration test. How do we make sure that we mitigate that risk and then inform our residents about what we're doing with it? To me, that's the micro trend of the bigger cyber picture as it relates to multifamily.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's at this point, it's like every company knows they need to eat their vegetables, and they're eating their vegetables. And now it's the fact of sort of like what you're doing with it. So it's sort of pervasive. It's no one's surprised by this anymore. There's no, this isn't sort of a thing like, oh, I didn't know. At this point, they know. So it is around the how you communicate. That's what I'm interested in, because in a lot of cases, historically, companies did this through like EULAs and terms and conditions where you just click the button. Now it's sort of like built into the design of the of really the ethos and the culture of the companies and the products themselves. So how do these products support what I've noticed, and I think you have too, is when we talk to a lot of these developers and owner operators and property management companies, there's people in there, it's sort of like now part of their business. So they want to know how you support what they're doing as well in this. So having that, and it's no longer like, I don't know, let me go call our chief security officer and they'll come in with where they don't say much, frankly, because they're worried about risk, where now it's a proper part of your sales pitch. And it's really something that you should be able to articulate right from the beginning. If somebody asks you, what are your, and maybe it's even part of the features and benefits where it's not just the blue blinky lights anymore. It's like, it's one of these leading things that says, here's our whatever we do and how we do it. And it just becomes a normal part of the business.
Yeah, but I I think there's another piece here though that isn't talked about as often, and
All
that's
right.
the potential risk that the resident brings to the owner, right? Especially, as we get into this connectivity and this IoT of things, and now the owner may be providing the platform or the baseline, whether it's a Google device or an Amazon device or an Apple device in the unit or whatever it is, and they're riding on the property's backbone. How does the owner and the operator and the property manager make sure they're protecting themselves from any devices or things that the resident is potentially bringing into the IoT, right? I mean, as we talk about Internet of Things, it's not just Internet of Things, it's Internet of everything now. And so
Yep.
how do we inform and properly advise the property managers and the owners to protect themselves as well, right? It's not just about
Totally.
the resident's protection from me, the big property owner and manager. If somebody's living in your space, they're bringing stuff in all the time, and who knows what those devices are, and you can't vet those as well. So
Yeah.
how do you protect from that side?
Yeah, totally. It's totally easy. You could order. There's a million different things you can get off of Amazon delivered to your house every single day, and like you said, it's going to be embedded in everything. So that'll be interesting to see how people handle that. So that'll be maybe that there's a micro trend, and probably a macro trend at this point, to be honest with you, because if there's a level of susceptibility, it's going to take one hack to happen, or one connected, I don't know, radio that's brought into the speaker into the radio, like it's 1980 again. One connected speaker brought into the unit that is a honeypot for bad stuff that happens for people to get real crazy there. So love that. So number 3 was predictive data analytics, and I do like this one, in my personal opinion, because I think the key here is, if you look at, I think we probably looked at the years past, the macro trend was probably data analytics. And now we're that first word here, predictive data analytics, is pretty telling on this case of kind of tied into the AI side, machine learning, and the rest of it. But it's taking the data and driving value, I believe, around making things predictable, that either are from a safety standpoint, which I'm excited about. Like, if there's everything from understanding forced door entry type stuff to maintenance side of things, just any of them really that gives you the ability to get in front of what might be, historically in our industry, everything was done after the fact when something bad happened, whether battery died or someone broke in or a key broke or whatever it might be. It was all done beforehand. This is now getting out in front, which drives a ton of value. So having, in my opinion, a clear understanding of what matters in predictive analytics, because there's probably a whole lot of things you could do. It's just a matter of fact, like, do you need to do them?
So, I mean, I think, and I agree, the predictive ad here is the difference maker. However, I still don't know if we've seen enough investment in, I don't know if data scientist is the right term. I don't know if you need to go to that level of investment as a property owner, as a property manager, as a manufacturer, but we've done a lot, I think, as an industry, the security industry as a whole and the multifamily industry as a whole, of gathering data and collecting data. And we have all this data. Now it's, have we made the investment to actually read and understand that data so that we can do some of this predictive analysis? As you mentioned, a lot of what we've done in the past is in the past, right? Something occurs. So then we go and gather this huge pot of data and say, okay, now we know what we need to look for. Now let's go back and look for it, right? So are we investing in the front to say, hey, these are the 8 things that are going to happen. Let's look in the data ahead of time to find out when that's going to occur. And I don't know if that investment has been made into really looking at the data as an ongoing part of your business, as opposed to something occurred, now let's go figure out why and adjust, right? And so I don't
Yeah,
know if that.
I would agree. I don't think there's been probably enough time discussing the use cases around it, and there may be conversations that go on in the individual companies around what that is, but as a whole, of like, as an industry that says, okay, in access control and smart locks, predictive analytic value creation is this. Like I don't think we've done that, because I mean, I look at a bunch of the stuff of marketing that's going out, and a lot of it's around either architecture talking points, cloud-based versus this, or it's things that have already been out, like, ability to send keys and the ability to get notifications and things like that, but not around. I haven't seen a lot in the predictive data analytics side that says, all right, here's how we're applying it. And I think that might be a good place for people to start doing it, especially, it's not going to go away. It's only going to become more, and this is where the value, I think, is going to be created. So having a very crisp understanding of this is how we as an industry function, and sort of the benefits, like mustering and things like that are just locked down, that are inevitably part of access control systems and smart locks. In the multifamily space, the ability to send keys and receive keys and do notification, like, there's just a whole lot that I think from that point of view hasn't been invested at all as well. So good opportunity. Number 4, connectivity and IoT of everything. You already mentioned that. I mean, I don't know how much we're going to add to this, other than my thought is, though, is we still, if we were to look at the overall selling of locks, there's still a large amount of mechanical, non-electrified that go in at this point. So my prediction, if you would, or megatrend that I see on this is, are we getting, and I made this a question, but are we getting to a point where everything does have, and because we talk about, like, everything's going to have it in there, but yet we still sell a lot that don't? Like, are we going to get to the point where this is not even a thing? It's 99% is connected. You don't have to call it smart locks. We actually flip it to where you have to denote when it's a dumb lock versus a smart lock, and you're just like, it's a lock. That, I wonder how far we're away from that happening.
I mean, I think we're still.
You tell me, lock guy.
I think we're still a ways away from that. I'd love to get there, though. I think residents would like to get there as well. The piece for me on the connectivity and IoT, and maybe this is just more me being curious than anything, is the 5G versus Wi-Fi 6, right? And how, if I step back and say, okay, in a consulting sense, right? Somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm retrofitting my building, or I'm building a new building. What would you recommend for connectivity? I don't know. How do I and how do others better understand 5G and Wi-Fi 6, and how does that impact the individual device, right? Because you're also talking Zigbee and the chip the whole chip program, and where is that going, and where's Z-Wave going? So, there's the device connectivity, there's the building connectivity. And I think ultimately we've got to have a very clear picture of, we're going Wi-Fi 6 or we're going 5G, before we answer some of those other questions. And I just think right now there's not, at least in my mind, maybe somebody out there can enlighten me. I don't have a ton of clarity on the benefits of Wi-Fi 6 versus 5G, and what does that really mean to a multifamily building today. And that, I guess I'm not answering anything here. I'm saying, to me, that's the biggest question of this trend.
Yeah, no, and that's maybe one that we should tackle and have somebody come on that could speak to it in much greater detail than either you or I can. But it also, I'll throw another one in there. Like, what does it mean then to Z-Wave and Zigbee and the existing products that are installed, right? Because you can't just there isn't like a switch that you flip and they switch over to those things. And then also you have now Sidewalk from Amazon that's come in, and LoRa and from Semtech, and you've got all of those competing technologies as well that they don't work together. Maybe actually, I don't think they do. So there's, but how does that all play? So if we don't understand it, the expectation of sort of from the developer side, owner side of, their expectations of locks, how they work within the ecosystem, like, there's a whole steep learning curve, other than just marketing stickers that go on it that say, here's a 5G lock.
And I'm hopefully I'm not stealing some thunder from our sustainability conversation here in the next month. But you brought up Stacy and then the Internet of Things stuff. She had a really good article the other day about, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago, about what this technology evolution does to the hardware lifecycle, right? And so if you make a switch to one of these new LoRa, technologies or something like that, does that make your investment in hardware now obsolete? And so there's so much stuff that goes into the connectivity and IoT that, to me, yes, the cyber is critically important, right? Because of risk. The predictive data analytics is probably the most fun. I think you can do the coolest stuff with understanding the data. But the connectivity and IoT, to me, is the one right now where, if you're going to make investments in a new building or a retrofit, to really understand the connectivity of the building, the connectivity of the devices, the connectivity of the resident into those systems, that to me is probably the most important one on this list as it relates to multifamily, if you ask me.
Love it. Totally. And lastly, and somewhat connected, is the cloud computing side. In my opinion, again, I think it's a little bit overplayed. This is just showing sort of I would say the maturity of the industry moving from old legacy systems into new. But I actually, in my opinion, I think the trend here is the acceptance of it and more people into it. But the actual trend, in my opinion, I think is this desire to have a hybrid, where you have products on site that go to the cloud when needed, but are able to compute locally. And again, I think we move away from the architecture conversations pretty soon here when we talk about the value that they create. And that's the trend, is sort of value creation that cloud computing introduces, mixed with, if you want to talk a trend, would be systems that are supporting this hybrid architecture, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the hybrid piece is, in my opinion, everything at some point is going to become a hybrid, right? You don't want to have to go to the cloud for every decision to be made, right? So how do those smarts come to the edge, right? So is each device its own computer? So instead of a server on site, you now have a small microcomputer that relies on cloud for what it needs when it needs it. I think you're spot on there. From a device manufacturer standpoint, we have to better understand how can our device act as fast as possible with the decision that needs to be made right now, while relying on the cloud for updates and other things of that nature. The other thing that I think is the most the biggest, and again, trend is a hard word for me, right? Because I think this is stuff that's been building for 3, 4, even 5 years in some cases. But the importance of the cloud is to ecosystems and integrations and partnerships amongst these different devices. And the ability to have cloud to cloud, platform to platform integrations versus platform to hardware integrations is a huge difference maker, in my opinion, of forcing one organization, let's call it, to write integrations directly to hardware versus writing an integration to somebody else's platform and cloud that they can do the difficulty things associated with, in our case, locking, right? Allow us to be on the forefront in drive innovation on locking functions and features, whether that's technology driven or mechanically driven, and you focus on what you're trying to do versus requiring, platform to hardware integrations, because there isn't that ability to go cloud to cloud and some of that sort of stuff. So that
I'd agree. Yeah, I would say my biggest macro trend that I don't see on here, that, in my opinion, specifically in the locks and multifamily spaces, it's the external influences now that are in the business that are driving who's on first and who's on second. Like, it used to be very clear on who drove and who followed. Now, it depends on who gets there first in some cases, to where, in some cases you're the complete turnkey solution and you're driving the specification, which historically that's been heavily how a lot of the products get to market. You've got a particular person that likes a particular brand and, look and feel, and they spec that, and that's how it trickles down. Or you had a contractor that, they had a relationship and it drove there, or you had a manufacturer. Like, it was very, I would say, industry specific, predictable on who of the four people were going to, win the business, or lead the win of the business, to where now you've got people from all over the place that are impacting. So how and what that means, because I think it becomes harder for, like companies like Salto and other lot companies to, how do you prioritize what development work you do? Like, it's almost impossible because you don't know where's your inputs and your listening posts coming from on what you should do. And in some cases, it's like, let's just not do anything and just make our lots of, acceptable for everybody else, but then you're relying on, you're only going to go as fast as your partners in that case. So that's also not very comfortable, I don't think, for as you get up higher in organizations to be able to articulate the business when you're like, I don't know, as soon as people decide to buy it, that's when we're going to sell it. Like, it just doesn't work that way. So I just feel like that fragmentation of the market and disruption that's happening to how product is being influenced and getting onto the jobs is impacting in ways that are not, you can't put your finger on it, but it's definitely having massive impacts in sort of the flow of how business used to be done.
Agreed. And I think that some of those impacts are coming from the developers and property managers as well, right? Because they're starting to get smarter in some of that too. So there's a lot more people, I think, involved today than there was in the past. So
yeah, very much so. I mean, I would argue a lot of them had no idea in some cases what was getting spec'd. It was handled by somebody else. So, well, very cool. Well, that was the 5 of the 20. Recommend everyone taking a look at them. And really, the way I think about it is, it's a great piece that allows you to start to just think about and introduce the topics. And like we had the conversation around predictive analytics. Number 3 on the list, what does it mean to our business, and have a conversation. So if anything, I think this list did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was spark a conversation. So, so with that, Colin, I think we did it. So awesome. Thank you very much for spending the time again, and we'll look to do it again next week.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks.